The courtroom went quiet when I stood up and said, "Your Honor, I am a forensic accounting consultant. I brought the bank statements, the transfer records, the corporate filings, and the property documents my husband hoped I would never understand." My husband stopped smiling. His mother stopped whispering. Even his attorney, who had spent the whole morning turning pages like this divorce was already finished, lowered his pen. But 30 minutes earlier, Darren Brooks had laughed at me in that same courtroom. "You are really representing yourself?" he said, loud enough for the people behind us to hear. I looked across the aisle at the man I had been married to for 16 years. He wore a dark blue suit, polished shoes, and a watch I knew cost more than what was left in my checking account. His lawyer sat beside him with a leather folder thick enough to make a person feel small. Behind them sat Darren's mother, Estelle. Estelle leaned close to her son, covered her mouth, and laughed. Then she looked right at me. "Too poor for a lawyer," she said. "This is sad." Darren gave her a little smile. Then Estelle added, "Robin, you are finished." I remember the sound of the courtroom clock over the judge's bench. Tick, tick, tick. For 1 second, shame tried to climb up my throat. I was alone at my table. I had one thin black folder, a legal pad, and a pen from a hotel lobby. Darren had a lawyer, a mother who thought he could do no wrong, and the confidence of a man who believed money was the same thing as power. Then I looked down at my folder. They thought it was thin because I had nothing. They did not know that every page in it had been chosen like a key. My name is Robin Brooks, and for most of my marriage, I was the woman who kept the peace. I was not born quiet. Anyone who knew me before Darren could tell you that. At 26, I had opinions about everything, from church committee budgets to whether a person should put sugar in grits. I worked long hours, took night classes, and built a career helping small businesses understand their books. Numbers made sense to me. People could smile and lie. Numbers were less emotional. When Darren and I met, he was working for a contractor and talking about starting his own construction company. He was handsome, charming, and hungry in a way I admired. He would sit at my kitchen table with graph paper, drawing out his dream office, his first crew, the trucks with his logo on the side. I believed in him. That is the part people forget when a marriage breaks down. You do not begin by hating the person. You begin by seeing the best in them so clearly that sometimes you stop seeing the rest. When we got married, Darren's business was still mostly a dream, and a few tools in a rented storage unit. I paid more than my share of the household bills while he saved. I organized tax papers. I helped him set up his first bookkeeping system. I spent late nights sorting receipts while he learned how to bid jobs. When Brooks Custom Build finally started making real money, I was proud. I thought we had built something together. Then the word together started disappearing. At first it was small. "Let me handle the business accounts." "You do not need to worry about that invoice. That account is company money." Trust me, Robin. Trust me. That phrase can be soft in the right mouth. In the wrong one, it is a locked door. The first time I really noticed the change, I was sitting at our kitchen table holding a bank statement. There was a transfer for $31,000 from our joint savings. "What is this?" I asked. Darren did not even look up from his phone. "Business expense." "What kind of business expense?" He sighed like I had interrupted surgery. "Robin, I do not have time to explain every little thing. $31,000 is not little." He finally looked at me. "We are married. You either trust me or you do not." That shut me up, not because it answered the question, because it turned the question into an accusation against me. I did trust him. For years I trusted him even when my stomach tightened. I trusted him when he moved more business mail to his office. I trusted him when he changed passwords and said the accountant needed cleaner access. I trusted him when he started talking about my company instead of our future. I thought peace meant not pressing. I know better now. Peace that requires you to stay confused is not peace. It is training. By the time Darren told me he wanted a divorce, he had already been planning for months. He said it over breakfast on a Tuesday morning. "I think we are better apart." I was holding a mug of coffee. I remember the mug because my niece had painted it for me at one of those pottery places. Blue flowers, crooked handle, Auntie Robin in purple letters. I set it down carefully. "Where is this coming from?" He folded his napkin. "We both know it has been over." "No, Darren, I did not know that." He looked away. "I have spoken to an attorney." That was how I learned he had a head start. 1 week later, I logged into our joint savings account and saw the balance had dropped by more than half. I called the bank. The woman on the phone was polite, but every polite answer made me colder. Several transfers, different dates, different destinations, all authorized. When Darren came home, I was waiting at the table with the printed statement. "Where did the money go?" He looked at the paper, then at me. "You will get whatever you are entitled to." That was our joint account? Do not make this ugly. I am asking where the money went. And I am telling you it does not concern you anymore. 16 years of marriage, and he said it like I had been renting space in his life. I called lawyers the next morning. The first retainer made me sit down. The second was worse. The third assistant asked if I had access to marital funds. I almost laughed. That was the problem. Darren had not left me with nothing. He was too careful for that. There was enough to keep the lights on, enough to make me look stable, but not enough to fight him the way he expected to be fought. For 2 days, I panicked. Then I remembered something Darren had forgotten. I knew records, not divorce law, not court procedure, not how to sound smooth in front of a judge. But records? Records were my language. For the past 9 years, I had worked as a forensic accounting consultant for small companies, churches, family businesses, and once a nonprofit where the treasurer had been borrowing money and paying it back whenever donations came in. My job was to look at numbers that did not make sense and keep looking until they did. So I stopped asking Darren questions he could turn into fights. I started documenting. Late at night, I sat in the spare room with a laptop, a scanner, and a stack of papers that smelled like old folders. I pulled bank records I could still access. I downloaded credit card statements. I searched public corporate filings. I printed property records. I made a timeline. I used colored tabs, blue for income, green for household expenses, yellow for business transfers, pink for unknown accounts, red for anything that made the back of my neck tighten. At first, I thought I might find a few ugly choices. Instead, I found a pattern. Money from our joint savings moved into Brooks Legacy Holdings LLC. From there, it moved out in smaller amounts. Some went to business accounts, some went to vendors I could not match to real jobs, some went to an account tied to Estelle, and some helped buy a lake cottage outside Asheville, the same cottage Darren always said belonged to his mother. The more I found, the more my hands shook. Not because I was surprised Darren had lied, because I was starting to understand how long he had counted on me not looking. The hardest night was not the night I found the first transfer. It was the night I found the invoice from Holloway Materials. Holloway Materials sounded real. It had a clean name, a business address, and 3 invoices for site prep and equipment staging. The amounts were not huge by themselves. 11,000 here, 9,000 there, 15,000 later. But the address bothered me. I had seen it before. It took me almost an hour to place it. Then I found it in an old envelope from Estelle's insurance company. Holloway Materials was registered to a small office suite in the same building where Estelle kept her mail service for the Asheville property. I sat back from the desk. The house was dark around me. The only light came from my laptop and the little desk lamp Darren always said was ugly. I opened the state business registry and searched the company. Holloway Materials had been formed 18 months earlier. The organizer was a name I did not know. The mailing contact was an address tied to Brooks Legacy Holdings. One of the payments from our joint money went there, then almost the same amount moved out to an account that later paid the cottage insurance. That was when the pattern stopped feeling like a mistake and started feeling like a map. I printed the invoices and laid them on the floor beside the bank records. There were now 3 paths from our marriage to Darren's family accounts. 1 could be explained, 2 could be argued, 3 was a story. The next morning, I went to the courthouse self-help center. I almost turned around in the parking lot because the sign on the door made me feel exposed. Self-help sounded like a public announcement that I could not afford what Darren could. Inside, the room was full of people who looked just as tired as I felt. A young father with a stroller, A woman in scrubs. An older man holding papers in both hands like they might fly away. The volunteer behind the desk was named Mrs. Harris. She did not give legal advice. She said that twice. But she showed me where to find forms, how to label exhibits, how many copies to bring, and where to file a request for financial disclosure. Do not argue in your papers, she told me. I am allowed to explain. Explain facts. Do not argue feelings. That became another rule for me. Facts, not fireworks. At home, I made an exhibit list. I practiced saying the dates out loud until I could do it without stumbling. I put sticky notes on each page. I made copies for the court and for Darren's attorney because Mrs. Harris said surprise might feel good, but procedure mattered more. One night, around midnight, I found myself sitting on the floor surrounded by paper, crying because the 3-hole punch jammed. That was divorce too. Not only betrayal, not only court. Sometimes it was crying over office supplies because your whole life had become documents and you still had to be at work by 9. The morning of the hearing, I sat in my car outside the courthouse for nearly 20 minutes. I watched people walk in with lawyers beside them, men in suits, women with folders. One older couple who looked so tired they might have been holding each other up. I had printed directions from the court self-help website. I had a folder in my lap. I had slept maybe 3 hours. I was terrified, but I was not empty-handed. Darren saw me before the case was called. His eyes dropped to my table. One folder, one pen. He smiled like a man seeing a door already open. That was why, when Estelle said I was finished, I almost smiled. She thought she was looking at poverty. She was looking at preparation. The judge called our case just after 10. Darren's attorney began with a calm speech about cooperation, reasonable division, and business assets that were separate from the marriage. He made Darren sound like a hard-working man trying to end a marriage with dignity. I listened. I took notes. I did not interrupt. That seemed to encourage Darren. He leaned back in his chair. Estelle whispered something and he gave that small smile again. Then the judge looked at me. Mrs. Brooks, do you wish to respond? My legs did not feel steady when I stood, but my voice did. Yes, Your Honor. I am a forensic accounting consultant. I brought the bank statements, the transfer records, the corporate filings, and the property documents my husband hoped I would never understand. That was when the room changed. Not loudly. Courtrooms do not always give you drama. Sometimes the air just tightens. Darren's attorney looked at me in a new way. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, show me what you have. I opened the folder to the first tab. This is our joint savings account. Both names are on it. Darren's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has already disclosed that certain funds were used for legitimate business purposes. The judge lifted one hand. Let her finish. I handed forward the first statement. On February 11th, $31,000 moved from our joint savings into Brooks Legacy Holdings LLC. Darren said, business expense. I turned the page. 3 days later, $30,400 moved from that company to an account ending in 7719. The judge looked down. Whose account is that? I looked at Estelle. Estelle Brooks. Estelle sat up. That is not what it sounds like. The judge looked at her. Ma'am, you will not speak unless I ask you to. Her mouth closed, but her eyes stayed sharp. Darren shook his head. My mother helped us plenty of times. Yes, I said. She did. For half a second he looked relieved. Then I added, but this was not money she gave us. This was money we gave her. Darren's attorney stood again. Mrs. Brooks is drawing conclusions from records she may not fully understand. I looked at the judge. I can show the path of every transaction I am presenting today. The judge nodded. Proceed. I was not there to put on a show. That mattered to me. I had promised myself in the car that I would not become what Darren expected. I would not scream. I would not insult him. I would not try to sound like a lawyer from television. I would let the paper talk. I turned another page. The transfer was labeled as a distribution. Darren said, exactly. By itself, that label is not unusual. His attorney relaxed a little. But the timing matters. The money did not stay in the business. It moved to your mother's personal account. Then 2 weeks later, Brooks Legacy Holdings paid closing costs tied to a property outside Asheville. Estelle's face changed. The judge looked up. The Lake Cottage? Yes, Your Honor. Darren's attorney asked to see the document. I gave him a copy. He scanned it quickly, then looked at Darren. It was subtle, but I caught it. He was not shocked that money moved. He was shocked that I had found the bridge. The judge asked, Mrs. Brooks, how much money do you believe moved through these related accounts? I swallowed. Based on what I can access so far, $192,000. Darren went still. Estelle gripped her purse. If you are listening from another city, state, country, or if it is late where you are, put it in the comments. I still remember that clock ticking over the judge's bench while everyone stared at my folder, and for the first time in months, I did not feel alone. Darren's attorney tried to shift the focus to my qualifications. Mrs. Brooks, you are not a lawyer, correct? Correct. You have never represented yourself in a divorce case before? Correct. You have never been qualified by this court as an expert witness? Correct. He gave a small smile. So you are asking the court to rely on your personal interpretation of complicated business records? No. He paused. I looked at the judge. I am asking the court to look at the original records. The dates, account numbers, corporate filings, property records, and emails can all be verified. The attorney's smile disappeared. That was something I had learned in my work. If the facts are strong, you do not need to make yourself bigger. You make yourself clear. The judge took the first stack and reviewed it page by page. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Then he asked Darren, Does your mother currently live in the Asheville property? Darren hesitated. She stays there sometimes. Estelle whispered, Darren. The judge looked at him. Does she pay rent? No. Who pays the taxes and insurance? Darren's attorney leaned toward him, but the judge's eyes stayed on Darren. The company, Darren said, and the company received funds from the joint account? For business purposes? That was not my question. Darren looked down. For 16 years, he had been quick with answers. In that moment, he had none ready. I turned to the Holloway Materials invoices next. Darren's attorney frowned before I even finished my first sentence. Your Honor, these are vendor payments, he said. They are labeled as vendor payments, I said. The judge looked at me. Explain the difference. I pointed to the first invoice. This invoice says Holloway Materials delivered equipment to a job site in Rock Hill, but Brooks Custom Build had no active job at that address during that period. Darren shifted in his seat. I pointed to the second page. The company address traces back to the same mail service used for Brooks Legacy Holdings. The payment left our joint-funded business account on June 4th. On June 6th, almost the same amount was transferred toward the insurance premium on the Asheville property. Darren said, That is a coincidence. Maybe, I said. I turned another page. But the same pattern repeats in August and October. The judge took the documents. Darren's lawyer did not object that time. He asked for time to review them. That told me he did not have a clean answer ready. Estelle leaned toward Darren and whispered something. Darren shook his head without looking at her. For years I had watched that little mother-son language from the outside. A glance, a whisper, a shared belief that if they agreed with each other, the rest of us were unreasonable. Now the documents were sitting between them too. I felt a sharp sadness then. Not pity, exactly. Sadness. Because somewhere along the way, Estelle had taught Darren that protecting him meant helping him avoid truth. And Darren had turned that lesson into a business method. The judge ordered a short recess so Darren's attorney could review the documents. When we stepped into the hallway, my hands started shaking so hard I had to hold my folder against my body. A woman from another case gave me a kind look as she walked past. I wanted to tell her I was all right, but I was not sure yet. Then Estelle came toward me. Are you proud of yourself? I turned. She stood with her arms crossed, dressed like Sunday service, pearls at her neck, anger all over her face. "No," I said. "You embarrassed my son." "The records embarrassed him." Her eyes narrowed. "You were never good enough for Darren." I had heard versions of that for years. At Thanksgiving when she asked if I was still doing little bookkeeping jobs. At birthdays when she called Darren the provider and me the helper. At family dinners when she said successful men needed wives who knew how to support, not question. Before that day, I would have swallowed it. I would have told myself she was old-fashioned. I would have gone home angry and said nothing. Instead, I looked at her and said, "You helped him move the money, didn't you?" Her face tightened. "You need to be careful." "I am being careful. That is why I brought documents." "You have no idea what you are doing." "Maybe not in court," I said, "but I know what a transfer looks like." For once, Estelle had no quick answer. The bailiff called us back in. When the hearing resumed, I opened the second section of the folder. This part hurt more than the bank statements. It was email. Darren had always told me I saved too much. "You keep everything," he used to say, laughing when I made folders for insurance papers, receipts, school donations, appliance warranties. He was right. I kept everything. The email subject line read, "The house and the money." It was from Estelle to Darren. "Did the money clear from the joint account yet?" Darren replied, "Yes." "It is done. Robin will not see it. Robin will not see it." I had read that line at my dining room table at 2 a.m. I had read it so many times the words felt burned into my eyes. Still, saying it in court made my chest tighten. The judge read the email silently. Then he looked at Darren. "Mr. Brooks, did you write this?" Darren swallowed. "I do not remember." His attorney closed his eyes for 1 second. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The judge asked for the email chain and supporting records to be marked for review. Then I showed the next document. "This is the original corporate filing for Brooks Legacy Holdings LLC. The company has been described as separate from our marriage, but the initial capital contribution came from an account we both owned." Darren said, "That does not make the whole company yours." I did not say it did. He looked confused.
I am saying marital funds were used to start and support assets you later claimed had nothing to do with the marriage. The judge nodded. That distinction mattered. Truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is precise. Darren's attorney tried again. "Mrs. Brooks, you admit these records can be interpreted in more than one way." "Yes." "And you admit you are emotionally involved." "Of course." "So why should the court treat your analysis as reliable?" "Because I brought the source documents. The court does not have to trust my feelings. It can verify the paper." The room went quiet again. Darren stared at me like he was seeing a person who had been in the house the whole time and had just stepped into better light. That hurt in a strange way. He knew what I did for a living. He knew I worked with financial records. He knew clients paid me to find what did not fit. But because I was his wife, he had decided my skill did not count. Before the judge spoke again, Darren's attorney asked one more question. "Mrs. Brooks, did anyone help you prepare this analysis?" "No." "No attorney?" "No." "No accountant?" "I am the accountant." A few people in the back of the courtroom made tiny sounds they tried to hide. Not laughter exactly, more like the room had exhaled. The judge looked over his glasses, and even he seemed to fight a small expression. Darren did not find it funny. His jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. For a second, I remembered our old kitchen table. Darren sitting with his laptop, me beside him with receipts, matching deposits, catching errors before they cost him fees. Back then, he had called me his secret weapon. Only when I worked for him. When I worked for myself, suddenly I was confused. That realization hurt, but it also steadied me. The judge did not decide the entire divorce that morning. Real court is not a movie. Nobody slammed a hammer and handed me a new life by lunch.
But the judge did order complete financial disclosure. Darren had to produce records for Brooks Custom Build, Brooks Legacy Holdings, related accounts, family transfers, property purchases, and any transaction that may have started with marital funds. He also ordered disputed assets not to be sold, moved, transferred, or borrowed against while the review was pending. That was when Darren truly went pale. Not when I stood up. Not when I named the first transfer. When he realized he could not keep moving things in the dark. As the hearing ended, Estelle leaned toward him. "What does this mean?" Darren whispered. "I don't know." The woman who had told me I was finished looked frightened. I thought I would feel victorious. I did not. I felt exhausted. Outside the courthouse, I sat in my car and cried for the first time in weeks, not because I had lost, because I finally understood what I had lost long before court. I had lost the husband I thought was my partner. I had lost years of believing that silence could keep a marriage healthy. I had lost the comfort of thinking Darren's confidence meant he knew better than I did. But there was one thing I had not lost: myself. That evening, I went back to the house Darren and I had shared. His side of the closet was half empty. The rooms looked familiar and strange at the same time. On the dining room table, my exhibit copies were still spread in careful stacks. I stood there for a while without touching them. Then I made myself dinner. It was not a brave dinner. It was toast, scrambled eggs, and grapes from a bag. But I sat at the table and ate slowly because for months I had been living on coffee and nerves. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. A text from Darren. "You embarrassed my mother." I looked at it for a long time. Old me would have written 3 paragraphs. Old me would have explained that Estelle embarrassed herself, that I had been calm, that I had a right to defend myself. New me typed 1 sentence. "The documents are now with the court." Then I put the phone face down and finished my eggs. That may not sound like much, but it felt like lifting a weight off my chest. I did not have to attend every argument Darren invited me to. 3 weeks later, the financial review started. That is when the larger picture came into focus. Darren had valued one ownership interest at around $90,000. The record said something else. The real value was closer to $420,000. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the valuation report. I did not cheer. I did not call anyone right away. I just sat there and thought about all the times Darren said, "You will never understand how these companies work." Now I understood enough. The business had grown during our marriage. I had helped in ways that did not always show up on a balance sheet. I ran the household when he worked late. I handled insurance forms and tax folders. I typed proposals when his first assistant quit. I delayed my own expansion plans because we agreed his company needed the early support. Some of that was love, some of it was labor. The fact that I had done it as a wife did not make it worthless. The review also found a company credit card I had never seen. That card paid for what Darren called client development. Some of it was normal enough. Meals, travel, hotel rooms near job sites. But mixed into those charges were things that made no sense for construction. Spa charges at the Asheville resort near Estelle's cottage, furniture delivery to the cottage, a jewelry store purchase the week after Darren filed for divorce. When my stomach tightened at that one, I wanted to turn it into proof of another woman. Maybe there was one, maybe there was not. I never found enough to know, and eventually I realized I did not need that answer. The financial betrayal was enough. Still, the card mattered because the payments had come from the same company Darren called separate and untouchable. The card showed the business was not some sealed-off professional world I had no right to discuss. It was paying for family comfort while Darren told me our joint money was none of my concern. Ms. Collier, the mediator, later called those records messy. I called them honest. Not because Darren had been honest, because careless people often tell the truth in places they forget to clean. Darren's attorney's tone changed after the review. The first settlement offer had been insulting. It treated me like a woman who should be grateful to leave with furniture and a small check. The next offer looked very different. There were still arguments. There were still delays. Divorce has a way of turning even obvious facts into paperwork that needs 6 signatures. But the story had changed. Darren could no longer say, "It is all separate." He had to account for the money. He had to explain the related transfers. He had to stop treating our marriage like a guest who had overstayed. One evening he called me. I almost did not answer. When I did, he sounded tired. "Robin?" "Yes?" "I did not know you could do all this." I looked at the stack of papers on my table. "You never bothered to find out." There was a long silence. "You really traced all of it?" "Enough of it." "Why did you not tell me you knew how?" I almost laughed. "Because you would have moved it faster." He did not answer. Then, quietly, he said, "You're right." Those 2 words were the closest thing to an apology I had heard from him in years. They were not enough, but they were something. The final settlement meeting happened on a rainy Thursday morning in a plain office near the courthouse. There was no audience, no Estelle, no dramatic speech, just Darren, his attorney, me, and a mediator named Ms. Collier sitting around a conference table with bad coffee in paper cups. Ms. Collier went through the updated financial picture: business interests, property value, joint savings, related party transfers, retirement accounts, tax issues, the Asheville cottage. The funds moved through Estelle. Darren sat quietly. I listened carefully. I was not imagining revenge. I was not picturing myself walking out with some giant check while Darren collapsed behind me. That is not how real life works. You walk out with documents. You call the bank. You change beneficiaries. You separate insurance. You update passwords. You learn which bill was on autopay and which one is about to embarrass you. Then you go home and figure out what to eat for dinner because the body still expects food after life explodes. The final agreement gave me a fair share of the marital assets, including value connected to the business interests that had been built during the marriage. The Asheville property was addressed. Darren had to account for the transfers involving his mother. Certain accounts were equalized, certain assets were sold. It was not fantasy justice. It was enough. When I signed the agreement, my hand shook. Darren noticed. For a moment, I hated that he noticed. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was the kindest his voice had sounded in months, which made me angry for reasons I could not explain. "I am signing the end of 16 years, I said. "No, I am not all right." He looked down. "I did not mean it that way." "I know." And I did know. That was the strange thing. By then, Darren was not acting cruel in every moment. Sometimes he was almost gentle. Sometimes he looked like a man walking through the wreckage of something he had set on fire and only now noticing there used to be furniture there. But gentleness after harm is still after harm. I signed. He signed. Ms. Collier gathered the pages and said there were still filings to complete, but the hard part was done. I walked outside into the rain without an umbrella. I had one in my bag.
I just did not take it out. For 2 blocks, I let the rain hit my hair and my face. I was not trying to be dramatic. I just needed to feel something that was not paper. A few weeks after everything was signed, Darren asked to meet. I said yes because there was one last box of paperwork to settle and because some part of me wanted to hear what he sounded like without an attorney beside him. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the courthouse. He arrived before me. When I walked in, he stood up. For a second, I saw the man I had married. Not the man laughing in court, not the man hiding transfers. Just Darren, older and tired. He pulled out the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." I sat. He looked down at his coffee. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. I spent years convincing myself that because I earned more money, I mattered more. "You did not just earn more money," I said. "You used money to decide what I was allowed to know." He nodded. "I know. I supported you when Brooks Custom Build was nothing but a rented storage unit and a dream. I know. You told me the business was our future. I know. Then when it became successful, you treated me like someone lucky enough to live near it." His eyes filled, but I did not soften the sentence. Some truths deserve to stand without a pillow under them. "I was wrong," he said. For years I had wanted those words. When they finally came, they did not fix what I thought they would.
Sometimes the apology you waited years to hear arrives after the part of you that needed it has already packed up and left. Darren looked at me. Did you ever love me? The question caught me off guard. Of course I did. When did you stop? I looked out the window at cars moving through the wet street. I did not stop loving you on one day. I stopped feeling safe with you. He lowered his eyes. Every time you hid something and made me feel foolish for asking. Every time you told me I did not understand. Every time you acted like my work in our life did not count. Something disappeared. He wiped his face quickly, like he hated that I saw. Are you going to forgive me? I thought about lying, but I was done doing that to keep rooms comfortable. I do not know. He nodded. That's fair. Forgiveness is not the same as going back. I know. That was the first time I believed him. Before we left, Darren said, You know what I thought when you stood up in court? That I was bluffing. He gave a sad little smile. Yes. I know. I thought you were scared because you did not have a lawyer. I was scared. He looked surprised. Then how did you stand there like that? I looked down at my coffee. Being afraid and being powerless are not the same thing. He sat with that for a while. When I left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped. I walked to my car without looking back. That felt like its own kind of answer. A month later, Estelle called. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. For a long moment, she said nothing. Robin, she finally said, I owe you an apology. I sat down at my kitchen table. For what part? She inhaled sharply, and for a second I thought she might hang up. Then she said, For telling you that you were finished. I waited. And for helping Darren believe he was the only one who mattered. That surprised me more than I wanted to admit. I thought you were trying to take what my son built. I was asking for what our marriage built. I understand that now. Do you? She was quiet. I am trying to. That was probably the most honest thing Estelle had ever said to me. I did not forgive everything in that phone call. I did not pretend her apology erased the years of little cuts, but I also decided I did not want anger to become a room I lived in forever. I hope you and Darren both learn from this, I said. We are. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Justice did not feel the way I thought it would. It did not feel like fireworks. It felt like a bank account with only my name on it. It felt like knowing where my money was. It felt like opening the mail without fear. It felt like standing in a smaller kitchen and realizing the silence did not scare me anymore. 6 months after the divorce was final, I moved into a house that was much smaller than the one Darren and I shared. The kitchen table only seated 4. The hallway closet stuck if you pulled it too fast. The backyard had one crooked fence board I kept meaning to fix, but every key on my ring belonged to a life I had chosen. No one could tell me which accounts I was allowed to see. No one could make me feel childish for asking questions. No one could say I was finished and expect me to believe it. I opened my own checking and savings accounts. I updated beneficiaries. I reviewed my retirement statements. I built an emergency fund one careful deposit at a time. I met with a financial planner because I did not want fear making all my choices. Those steps might sound ordinary. To me, they were freedom. The first time I invited friends over, I almost canceled. It was only 3 women from work and my cousin Natalie. Nothing fancy. Chicken salad, fruit, store-bought pound cake, and coffee. Still, I stood in my kitchen that afternoon and worried the house looked too small. I worried the chairs did not match. I worried someone would compare it to the big house Darren and I had owned. Then Natalie walked in, hugged me, and said, "This place feels like you can breathe in it." That sentence nearly undid me. We ate around the little table. We talked about work, recipes, stiff knees, and the neighbor's dog that barked at delivery trucks. No one asked me to explain Darren. No one asked if I was lonely. No one acted like my smaller life was a sad prize. After they left, I washed the plates by hand, even though the dishwasher worked. I looked around the kitchen and realized I had not thought about Darren for almost 3 hours. That was when I understood healing does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as a normal evening. During my marriage, I slowly handed over pieces of my independence because I thought that was trust. Now I understand trust differently. Trust does not mean closing your eyes. Trust means you can ask a question without being punished for asking. That is one of the biggest things I carried out of my divorce. Know your finances. Know what accounts exist. Keep copies of important papers. Understand the mortgage, the insurance, the retirement plans, the debts, the tax returns. If you do not understand something, ask. Not because you expect betrayal, but because adults should understand the life they are building. I also learned not to make big money decisions out of anger. I could have drained accounts when I found the first transfer. I could have posted emails online. I could have called Darren's clients. I could have tried to embarrass him the way he embarrassed me. I did not. I documented. I followed the process. When I needed guidance, I asked for it. My accounting background helped, but I never forgot that accounting is not legal advice. If someone listening is facing divorce and cannot afford full representation, look into legal aid, court self-help centers, local bar association programs, and limited scope services. Do not let shame keep you from learning your rights before you sign anything. I had once believed needing help meant I had failed. Now I know better. A few months later, Darren and I had one last paperwork lunch. It was not emotional. It was not romantic. We met at a small restaurant to sign a document tied to the settlement. He asked about my work. My consulting has grown, I said. That's good. It is. He looked at his hands. I always knew you were good with numbers. I looked at him. You did not act like it. He nodded. I know. There was no fight in his voice. Just regret. After a moment, he said, You know what bothered me most after everything? What? You never tried to destroy me. I sat back. I considered it. He looked up. I did, but I decided I did not want to build my new life around your mistakes. He was quiet for a long time. I deserved worse. Maybe. That made him look at me. But I did not need to become worse to prove you were wrong. He nodded slowly. You are stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I smiled a little. No, Darren. I was always this strong. I just finally stopped hiding it. That was the last conversation we ever had about the courtroom. Over time, Darren and I learned how to communicate without reopening every wound. There was no reconciliation. The marriage was over. But there was a kind of peace in knowing I did not have to hate him every day to prove that what he did was wrong. As for Estelle, we never became close. That would have been too neat and not true. But we became civil. She apologized once more at a graduation party for a niece we both loved. I accepted it. That did not erase the past. It simply meant I was no longer carrying it everywhere. People think revenge is watching the person who hurt you suffer. I used to think that too. But that courtroom taught me something different. The greatest victory was not seeing Darren go pale. It was not watching his lawyer shuffle papers. It was not learning that the hidden value was far bigger than Darren admitted. Those moments mattered. But they were not the real victory. The real victory came later. It came when I woke up in my own house and did not feel afraid. It came when I opened my bank account and understood every number. It came when I signed a new consulting contract with my own name. It came when I stopped wondering whether Darren, Estelle, or anyone else approved of me. I went into divorce court thinking I needed to prove I was not poor. I walked out, understanding money had never been the whole point. Money can be moved, property can be sold, businesses can rise and fail, people can rewrite their stories, but dignity can be rebuilt. If someone has ever laughed because they thought you were powerless, remember this. You do not have to become cruel to become strong. You do not have to destroy someone to reclaim yourself. And you do not have to let another person's opinion become the measure of your worth. Sometimes justice is telling the truth clearly. Sometimes revenge is refusing to stay broken. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is not, "Look what I did to you." It is, "I finally chose myself." If you were sitting alone in that courtroom, would you have stood up and spoken, or would fear have kept you quiet? Tell me where you would have found your courage. And if this story kept you listening, like and subscribe for more family stories where the truth finally gets spoken out loud.